Hey, I'm Jake Newton, the Vice President of Security Solutions for the Center for Personal Protection and Safety, and this is a Part 1 instructional video out of 2 that we're doing as part of our collective Active Assailant workshop. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about the connection between workplace violence prevention and Active Assailant preparedness. So to start this video off, I'm going to talk a little bit about the spectrum of violence. Because while some of these programs may be in a silo, ultimately, they're part of the same spectrum. On the far left-hand side, you've got behaviors of concern. Moving up, you've got threatening behaviors. And then you've got physical injury. And then, of course, on the far right-hand side of the spectrum, you have death. Well, a comprehensive program is going to look at all of those different things and be ready for those things, have a plan, try to prevent those different issues from occurring, be able to respond to those different issues when they do occur, and then of course having a recovery process built in so that if and when these do happen, we have a way to get back to business as usual, making sure our people are okay and making sure that the organization is able to maintain or continue on as it did to the extent that it's able. So let's talk a little bit about this. On each of these different components of the spectrum, there's prevention considerations, there's response considerations, and even there's also, to varying degrees, the recovery aspects as well. The biggest question you might have to ask yourself firstly is, are these programs together? Are they speaking to each other, in other words? Or, for your organization, are they separate and distinct? I would encourage you to look at that because ultimately we want this to be all part of one collective process. And while there may be multiple people involved, which is usually a good thing, we want to have multiple stakeholders involved, a multidisciplinary team to oversee this process and look at this from an organizational perspective. But that's a question you have to ask and identify. Are these things distinct or are they part of the larger goal of preventing violence, making sure our people stay safe? So when we're looking at the prevention side of this, one of the first things that your program's going to need is a policy. Have a policy that's committed to a safe and secure workplace, free from violence and threats of violence. It starts the foundation for the prevention of all of these different things. And in the workshop, you heard about different standards that we like to benchmark, and just for refresher's sake, we like to benchmark those from OSha. An OSha instruction that was republished in 2017, and of course the ASIS International Standard for Workplace Violence and Active Assailant Preparedness, Prevention, Intervention, and Response are two really quality documents that you can use to build these different initiatives out. But it starts with that policy. Of course, with any policy that you have, you want to be able to implement it effectively, and so whether it's from the prevention side of things or the response side of things, you want to be able to recognize who's going to be doing it, what are their responsibilities, what does that implementation look like, and the training considerations, as well as, the response components and how we're going to mitigate these things when they occur, all of those different things. At the center, we call that a governance document. And then on the extreme side of this, we want to have a specific protocol, and I'm going to put a pin in this because we're going to talk about it in our second video specifically, but a protocol specifically to the planning, response, and recovery strategies for an active assailant. Now, why would we have one specifically for that? Well, it's a high impact, albeit low probability that we can say now it's happening all over the place and it's happening more frequent, but we can still say it's a remote kind of thing from occurring. But because of the impact it has in the organization, there's a suite of activities that need to happen specifically for that issue. So we're looking at the prevention and the response. We're looking at the full spectrum of violence with all of these different initiatives. So we've got the policies, then we get into the training. What will we train to? Well, your training program ultimately should address all of these different concerns on the spectrum of violence, and the depth that you go into is going to be dictated by who is being trained. So our organization, our employees, we want to give them an organizational awareness of these different considerations, talking about the policy. What are the warning signs to look out for, i.e., what are those concerning behaviors on the far left-hand side of the spectrum? What are they supposed to do about that? And getting into those reporting considerations. And then talking about maybe some of the more of these extreme issues, the intimate partner violence and stalking issues and how that impacts the workplace, understanding that that is part of workplace violence and absolutely does impact the workplace. And of course, if it does get to that extreme level, how does the individual respond to an active assailant? As we move up the ladder, then we start getting into training of managers and leaders and taking deeper dive into some of these concepts so that they can have a better understanding of what prevention looks like, their role in it, because now they're going to start having some of those leadership considerations, but also what it looks like from that response perspective. And as you keep going up the ladder within an organization, the more responsibilities that are going to be there in terms of leading an organization through a potential crisis if one is to occur. So we start getting into all of these different layers, but we're looking at that spectrum of violence and we're giving different stakeholders within the organization the ability to respond and address and hopefully prevent each of these different layers from occurring throughout the entire program. Bringing this full circle, all of this is a spectrum. Neither of these two things are distinct. You have workplace violence prevention and active assailant preparedness ultimately as one part of a larger goal of protecting people. They're not two different programs, they're after the same goal: preventing, responding to, and recovering from potential violence. So we're looking at the spectrum. One of the things that we know about active assailants is that before they got to that level, is that there's often signposts along the way. It's an evolutionary process where it started with a grievance, some sort of perceived or real injustice. For whatever reason, they identified violence as the answer, and they go through this process of eventually committing their act. Leading up to that event, there's observable behaviors that show us that somebody is struggling and they need some sort of intervention. And so we build this program to look at all of this spectrum of violence so that we can get as far left on the spectrum as possible, interceding in concerning behavior and these threatening behaviors as part of our larger goal to uphold a respectful and professional workplace.